All right, so a little different than Jamie's talk earlier. So, because I'm with the National Mineral Information Center portion of the USGS, and I'm going to talk about a paper I published last year about estimating mine costs, and more specifically about rare earth mining mines. Oh, where's the thing? There we go. So kind of why are we doing this? Why is USGS concerned with estimating mine costs? So if you can read it, but highlighted in the yellow here is something I pulled out from a CRS report, but simply, I simplified it down for time's sake, is that Congress, as a part of the Energy Act of 2020, has asked us, with no funding, to supply a supply and demand model for all non-fuel mineral commodities. Simple task. But what's really relevant for this talk is that we're supposed to be estimating future supplies for 1, 5, and 10 years into the future. So what we really need to know, and what really brings us here, is the fact that we need to know that where will mine production come from? We need to try to estimate and kind of guess where future mines may come online. We dabbled with this a little bit earlier, but for people not familiar with it, rare earth, for today I'm going to be talking about rare earths, and these are the 15 lanthanide group elements, that kind of bottom of the periodic table that your high school teacher said you're never going to really need to know anything about that, and as well as yttrium. There's many uses for rare earths, but what's really been driving demand is their use in neodymium ion boron magnets. And most specifically, those elements are praseodymium, neodymium, terbium, and dysprosium. On this chart on the right I plotted is about 20 years of historical as well as Project Blue future projections of demand versus supply. And if you're at that one line, demand, supply is just meeting demand. And so since about 2020, we're roughly where that spike is. For 3 of those elements, all except for praseodymium, we have been sitting at about 1. But if you go all the way and look all the way to the right and those future projections at 2030, we've crossed that 1 threshold. So supply is not going to be able to meet with the demand for those essential rare earth elements. And it's not like we really have a lack of resources of these rare earths, because a lot of studies have shown is that geologically we have plenty of resources, but what we have a hard time doing is getting them to the downstream. Either that's due to export restrictions or other forms of supply disruptions, being that mines not opening on time, or just they are not able to actually open at all, and they fail prior to construction. So what we need are tools to evaluate where these future productions may come from. So what we need to do is be able to estimate economically what mines may have the potential to come online. And so we need to have tools to estimate and determine what these costs may be that go into these projects. So that led me into this work of looking into mine costs. And so they just gave me a simple project of, hey, look at rare earths. There's not that many out there, so maybe there shouldn't. It's not like copper or gold where there shouldn't be. Shouldn't get too caught up in a ton of data. And so I went through about 27 different feasibility studies. Extracted all the cost information, CapEx, OpEx. There's a multitude of different types of mining styles, but for the most part, the ones that from the feasibility studies that I looked at, they've concerned themselves mostly with open pit and underground mines. One looked at recovery from tailings deposits, and that was, for the most part, mining for that project was ignored. Again, as well as the mining types, there's a multitude of different flow sheets that could be considered. So I really kind of summarized it and simplified it into 3 processing types. Either you're going to do beneficiation to force some kind of concentrate, you're going to do beneficiation and acid cracking and leaching to form a mixed rare earth precipitate, likely a carbonate or something of that nature. And then you're going to take it all the way down to what I'm just referring to as advanced, and some kind of separation, solvent extraction, and you're going to produce the separated rare earth oxides. And to put this together, I just did simple univariate linear regression. And it looks like something on here, and the charts look like something on the left. What you're going to do is your independent variable is going to be some form of capacity, and the dependent on the y-axis is the cost, either OpEx or CapEx. So the first ones they're going to look at are the capital expenditures. What we have on the top left is the mining development. Blue is the underground mine, while red is the open pit mines. First things that you can see is that the underground are significantly more expensive than the open pit, and a lot less capacity. To that, onto the right in the yellow is the non-processing infrastructure. And those are plotted not versus any kind of capacity, but what is plotted is where its location, or where it is a distance from a nearest infrastructure or town. And that's kind of based upon the presence of, the more remote it is, the more the non-processing infrastructure is going to be. And so what I mean by non-processing infrastructure, I mean like your roads, your power plants, your power lines. So the more remote it is, the more roads you're going to need to build to get it out there. To that on the right is the mineral processing infrastructure. That is the capital costs that go into buying your equipment. That is plotted versus the mill feed rate versus the cost. And so on the green, what we have is the beneficiation only. The red is the beneficiation of cracking and leach, and then the blue is the all the way taking it to the separated rare earth oxides. And it makes sense. This is the more equipment and the more processing that is involved, the more expensive that those become as you go from the green, red to the blue. And again, as you increase in your feed rate, there is that positive slope showing that you're going to need to buy more and more and larger equipment, and so costs are going to be more expensive. On the bottom left is your indirect and sustaining costs. That is, things like your contingencies, your taxes, the sustaining capital, and other things of that nature. What they show is an increase with mine capacity, and the same as the closure costs. Surprisingly, the tailing storage facilities really didn't show any kind of relationship with resource size or capacity of that nature. And so for this, we simply just took the average or the median, the average of the open pit or the underground mining operation. Next is the operational costs that went into it. These are all plotted versus the mill feed rate. I'm not going to go as hardcore into these and compared to the capital costs. And on the top left is the mining. Again, the blue is the underground, and the red is the open pit. So again, the underground is more expensive, but a lot less capacity. And then for the other 5 costs that we have here, red is the forming that precipitate, and then the blue is the separated rare earth oxides. And so we see, again, the more processes that are involved, the more expensive it is. But then as you increase the feed rate, your operating costs go down per ton because we're becoming more efficient with our economies of scale. And so kind of one of the goals of this project was not just to be able to determine these costs, because, but what I should say here is there's a nice tool with the paper in the supplementary information. So you can there's a nice Excel sheet you can go through, put in your information for, what kind of mine and stuff it is, and that'll give you the total cost of your project. But if we're determining these, the supply of rare earths into the future, what we need to know, based upon some kind of limited information, what kind of mines that may come online 10 years into the future. So what I wanted to do is develop a model where all I knew was what was the deposit size, what kind of deposit was it, where is it located, and what kind of mine type it may be, and then you can estimate the cost of that project. And so what I did is take 12 unknowns where I didn't, no feasibility or any kind of pre-economic analysis was done on any kind. And I modeled them being what was their kind of speculated mine type, and then I modeled them all as being as all forming a separated rare earth oxide. And those are what you see over here on the right. On the top is the capital costs. On the bottom is the operating costs, and what they are is plotted versus the cumulative reserves of those 12 deposits. And these are, I would call them similar to what you see as a supply curve. So a jump up or down in those plots would indicate an individual deposit or a project. The first thing that really kind of jumps out is the larger deposit, the more expensive it is. Kind of makes sense. But there's some, it's also showing some deviations in it. If you see that TA, I wish I could really point them out. Is there? No. All right. The TA and the TO that you see here in the top, and the capital costs on the top, there's the Tom Tour and the Tambreez mines. Those are really remote mines, out really in the absolute middle of nowhere. And so what they're going to be, if you look at the kind of maroonish color, that is the non-processing infrastructure. So because of the remoteness, that the capital costs that go into that non-processing infrastructure kind of shift those projects off to the right. So those little tiny deposits are as expensive as much larger ones. And then what we see here is that the cost of the mine really kind of affects it. So for the capital cost, that kind of big blip that we have in the kind of tannish color on at the bottom is the Montvale deposit, which is in Quebec, Canada, and that is speculated to be an underground mine. And so it has a rather large mining capital costs. And then also as well, what you see in the bottom and the operating costs, that Montvale, which being an underground mine, shifts it into the middle between those two rather large deposits. But we don't live in a perfect world. We live in a world where there's one rather large dominant producer of rare earths, and they are able to produce those rare earths at such a reduced rate compared to the rest of the world. And so what we wanted to see is how would the rest of these projects compare? How are they able to fare within, in a world where where there is a low-cost producer? So we took those 12 deposits and modeled it versus 4 projects from China, and going through the labor statistics as well as the energy statistics, I was able to deduce is that they are able to. They have that China has an 80% reduced labor cost and a 20% reduced power cost compared to the rest of the world. And one of the projects that I chose was the Bayan Obo, which is the iron ore operation, and so they're actually producing rare earths as a byproduct of that iron ore production. And so the only thing that was included for the only costs that are included are related to the rare earth production itself and nothing else. And so on the top left is the capital costs again. And so we see the big thing that really stands out is that large deposit on that first. So all the Chinese ones are in red, outlined in red, and the Bayan Obo is that first one on the bottom left. And what we see is only the mineral processing costs that go into the rare earth production is included, so they are able to produce rare earths at such an insignificant rate compared to the rest of the world, and then the other 3 Chinese operations just kind of fall in line. But in the bottom left, and for the operating costs, so we see where the reduced labor and reduced electrical energy costs come into effect. It was where it shifts those Chinese operations to the left in that supply curve, and showing that they're able to produce larger amounts for a reduced rate compared to the rest of the world. How am I doing on time? Okay, cool. So I got 4 minutes. Or am I over now? Oh, shoot, okay. My bad. All right. I'll try to go through this quickly. So now we just want to see is, with having these costs, what we want to see is how are these projects able to come online in the future? And so what I did is take the net present value equation, and if you're not familiar with that, that is simply just looking at your revenue, so your annual production and your price minus the cost that we calculate, that we were able to model. And we looked at it over 4 different time periods. When prices are high in 2011, when prices bottomed out in 2016, what I'm calling a relatively present day in 2022, and then future projections. And so this is my last slide. And this is the outcome of that net present value equation. So if there's a positive net present value, that mine, it doesn't matter how positive it is, that mine was able to move forward and actually start producing. If it was negative, it was not able to. And so in 2011, on all those histograms on the right are showing the potential rare earth supply that may come out as a result of those mines opening. And so in 2011, essentially all of them, when prices were high, essentially all of them were able to open. And so only 4 did not pass. In 2016, when prices bottomed out, only 2 projects were open, and both of them were China, including the Bayan Obo. And then the 2022 and 28 yielded similar results. And so 5 mines yielded positive net present values. For the rest of the world, so 2 from the rest of the world, that Mont Vale from Quebec and the Zanskar Drift from South Africa were able to come online, and what we had, and these are the amount, and what we see here on the bottom is the amount of potential rare earth supply that could come out from these 2 mines if they were to the total amount of supply that could come out if these mines were able to open. And so my concluding statement is saying that from just a little bit of information, just the resource size, what kind of deposit it is, and as well as, in its grade, we're able to estimate future supplies for rare earths. And I'm sorry for taking too long.